Kia ora, good morning everyone, Wang here, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to have a look at this new ultra wide angle lens from Pergear. And a quick disclaimer before we start, the sample I used in this review was sent to me by Pergear, but just like my other reviews, I will share with you all the pros and cons I found about this lens. This Pergear 40mm f2.8 lens is a lens that is designed for full-frame mirrorless cameras. It's available for most of the common camera mounts, and the one that I use in this review is for the Nikon set, but optically all the different versions are the same. It is a fully mechanical, fully manual lens, so there's no electronic context, no electronic features, no autofocus, and the EXIF data of the photo also won't have the lens information as well. The size of this lens is reasonably small for a full-frame 40mm f2.8 lens, and the weight is just under 500 grams, which is not too bad for a lens that has full metal construction. Just like a lot of ultra wide-angle lenses, the front element is slightly extruded, but you can still use a 77mm front filter if you want. The lens comes with a reversible lens hood that is made of metal. The focus ring is near the front of the lens. Focus flow is around 90 degrees, which is about right for an ultra wide angle lens like this Pergear lens. It is an internal focus lens, so the length of the lens doesn't change when I turn the focus ring. The focus ring itself feels okay and it is reasonably smooth, but I do hear a tiny bit of metal grinding noise when I turn the focus ring near the infinity focus setting. The aperture ring is declicked, and while it feels quite smooth, I can also hear a little bit of noise when I turn the aperture ring. So overall, for a budget lens, I think the build quality is acceptable, but it's not amazing. This Pergear lens minimum focus distance is 0.43 meter, which is not really that close at all for an ultra wide angle lens, and because of that, the maximum magnification ratio is also not very high. So I don't know the exact number, but it's definitely less than 0.1, so it's not really a lens that is very suitable for taking close-up photos. Next, let's have a look at the image sharpness, and as usual, let's start with the center sharpness first. At the maximum aperture f2.8, the center sharpness is reasonably good and I see no chromatic aberration. The center sharpness would improve gradually as I stop down the lens, and at f5.6, the center sharpness is excellent. If you continue to stop down the lens, the center sharpness remains excellent until diffraction kicks in at around f11, which would make the image slightly softer from that onwards. Let's look at the corner sharpness. At f2.8, the corner is really quite soft. I have to stop down the lens all the way to around f11 to get usable corner sharpness. And this is when I focus at the center of the photo. If I focus at the corner, then I can get much better corner sharpness. Even at the maximum aperture f2.8, the corner sharpness is already usable, and it will get sharper as I stop down the lens more.
To make sure the corner sharpness issue is not caused by user error or some random one-off thing, I did some more tests and the result was pretty much the same. To make the edge of the photo sharp when I'm shooting object at far away distance, I need to set the focus quite a bit closer than what it actually is. So I guess that suggests the lens has quite a bit of field curvature. You have to be careful how or where you focus the photo if the corner sharpness is important to you. For an ultra wide angle lens, even with the fast f2.8 maximum aperture, it is usually not easy to dissolve the background into bokeh. And this is especially true for this Pergear lens, as the minimum focus distance is almost half a meter. So even when I shoot at the closest focus distance, I still don't really get much bokeh balls in the background at all. At f2.8, we can see quite a bit of vignetting in this test photo. Stop down to f4, it improved a bit.
It continues to improve until we stop down to f8 when vignetting becomes quite minor, and it remains pretty much the same until we stop down to the minimum aperture f22. Chromatic aberration seems to be quite minimal with this Pergear lens. I don't see much color fringing at all in most of my photos. Even the high contrast photos, when I zoom in, I still don't really see much chromatic aberration. I was a bit surprised as I was really expecting to see quite a bit of color fringing for a budget ultra wide angle lens. Distortion could be easily a big problem for an ultra wide angle lens that has no built-in lens profile correction. But surprisingly, this Pergear 14mm lens has very minimal amount of distortion. Look at these photos that I shot when I did a job a couple of months ago using this lens. I don't really see much distortion at all. Look at all those straight lines near the edge of the frame, both the horizontal and the vertical lines. They are all very nice and very straight. Lens flare performance is a bit of mixed bag with this Pergear lens. Quite often, when I shoot into a bright light source, I don't really get much lens flare and the contrast remains reasonably good. However, for some photos or videos, usually when there is a very bright light source that is near the center of the frame in front of the camera, then we will see some circle-shaped orange color lens flare in the photo. If this is a portrait lens, then I would probably say I love that lens flare as it adds a little bit of cinematic look to the portrait photo. However, for an ultra wide angle lens that is quite often used for landscape photo rather than portrait, I'm not too sure if this orange lens flare is what I want in my photo. Now the good news is, this orange lens flare would only appear when the light source is at some particular direction. So it is possible to avoid or at least minimize it by changing the composition or the camera angle a bit. If you are my regular viewer, you will know that 10-point SUNSTAR is my favorite SUNSTAR, and that's why I love the SUNSTARs from a lot of wide-angle Laowa lenses. And this Pergear 14mm lens also render 10-point SUNSTARs as well. Not only the SUNSTARs are my favorite kind, and you only need to stop down the lens to f4 and the SUNSTARs will start to appear in the photos. The tails of the SUNSTARs is sharp and long at f4 already, and the tails will get sharper and slightly longer as you stop down the lens further. But interestingly, I find the SUNSTARs actually look the best at around f11. The reason is, if I stop down the lens more, I would get a bit more lens flare near some of the bright light source, which makes the SUNSTARs slightly not quite as clean. But anyway, if you also love 10-point SUNSTARs like me, you will love the SUNSTARs from this Pergear 14mm lens. One thing that really surprised me quite a bit is the amount of focus briefing with this lens. I should say the lack of focus briefing. When I did my usual 1.5m to 20m focus briefing test, I see virtually no focus briefing at all. So I did the test again and go from the minimum focus distance of 0.43m to infinity. And there's still only very minimal amount of focus briefing. So if you are a videographer looking for a lens with no focus briefing, this is something that you should consider. An ultra wide angle lens is one of the hardest lenses to make. There are so many things that you need to get it right. Sharpness, distortion, vignetting, lens flare, they are all quite tricky because of the very wide field of view. A budget ultra wide angle lens is even harder because you have even more restrictions. With this Pergear lens, it performs quite well in a few areas. For example, I'm very impressed by the very minimal amount of distortion. I love the SUNSTARs, and it almost has no focus briefing, which makes it great for videography. The size of this lens is also not bad at all for a 14mm f2.8 lens. It's a bit of shame the corner sharpness of this lens is quite poor. Most likely it's caused by the field curvature, and it makes the lens tricky to use if you need good sharpness from the center all the way to the corner. It also means when you are taking photos that the corner sharpness is important, you can't really take advantage of its f2.8 fast maximum aperture. You will need to stop down the lens a bit to get better corner sharpness. The other downside is lens flare, which sometimes is not bad, but sometimes you get that orange ring lens flare, which is not really that great for landscape photos. So whether this lens is suitable to you really depends on what you want. If you want great corner sharpness, it is not the best lens for you. But if you want some beautiful SUNSTARS or a lens for videography that has very little focus briefing, it could be a good budget choice for you.